welcome to another Checiegirl Creations video. So today I will be creating a page in my fabric art journal, and this page is denim from the looks of it, and I'm just going to show you how I primed it. I had already primed it before filming this video because it just takes really long to dry. I like to leave it to air dry, so it takes a while. So I just like cover it. I'm using clear chalk primer, which is like clear gesso, but I make it myself and it has a chalky texture. And now I like to pre-prep my pages so that when I'm ready to get to it, I can just start instead of having to worry about priming it and waiting for it to dry. And I made sure to wash my brush off really well using that 3 rinse technique. And I'm going to pin some photos of roses and painted roses because I wanted to do a rose painting, a really painterly kind of way. So I was just pinning different inspiration, and I'll link that board below if you guys want to follow along with the video. And of course you don't need a fabric art journal. You can just do it on a piece of paper, on a canvas, whatever surface you like. And I've picked out some cat tongue paintbrushes. I believe that's what they're called, and basically it's a flat brush with a rounded edge. And the paints that I'm using today for the flower, I'm using Crawford Blacks, Rose, Crawford Black White, and Reeves Fluorescent Pink, and Phthalo Blue by Reeves for shading. And for the leaves, I'm using Incado Sap Green, Reeves Medium Yellow, and Reeves Phthalo Blue for shading. I was going to use a red and a yellow ochre, but I decided against that. I didn't want to make it too busy, and I preferred lighter colors, and I'm glad I picked the lighter colors because when I was painting this I realized I had to put quite a few layers to get a strong color because I was painting on a colored background. So yeah, this was using tone paper. I don't think I've ever used that before, but it was really nice painting on this blue background, which is why I chose the blue paint for the shading, because I thought that would just go better than using a brown or something. So yeah, so I'm just putting on the initial shapes. I'm using a large brush. I kind of go from large to small brushes as I go through this process, and I'm using a big brush because I don't want to get too bogged down with details. I just want to get that initial shape in, because I will be nestling the rose with some leaves around it, so I knew the petals will get covered up a little bit by the green, so I'm just putting it placing it where I want it on the page and kind of getting that shape right. And if you want to see this video in real time with real-time commentary, you can become a Patreon for from just $3 a month, and you can get early access to my Friday YouTube videos. So now for the leaves, I'm doing the base with the sap green, and then I'm putting in highlights with the medium yellow, just like how I did the base with the rose and added highlights with the fluorescent pink on the flower. And I was going to start off more with the visual triangle, so just have 3 spots with leaves on it, and the visual triangle just really helps to bring your piece together, and it kind of makes the viewer look in the middle of the page, which is where your focal point is. It just kind of makes things look good. I'm sure there's some kind of scientist that says why, but yeah, it works. But in the end I do end up pretty much going all around the rose with leaves, because the 3 groups of leaves I wasn't liking how it looks, so I decided to add more. And when you add so many, the visual triangle doesn't really matter anymore. I mean, I do have 3 spots where there's bigger leaves, but that's about it. Yeah, but the more you create, the more you'll be able to figure out how things work and how to make your piece look nice and cohesive. And talking about cohesive, I am using a small amount of colors because it doesn't make the piece look too busy. And yes, I do sometimes go crazy with the color, but learning your color theory does help when you do want to go crazy with color, so it still looks good, and everything goes well and doesn't look as if someone just chucked paint on a canvas without thinking. And you can see that I have those mini pages. I thought I would just mention, that's how I used to make my old journals, and sadly there's no process of me making this journal. I just did this on my own time many years ago when I first started it. I've had it for a while. If I complete it by the end of this year, I'll be really happy. And yeah, so I used to put mini pages, and sometimes I would decorate the page at the same time so that they would coordinate. But I've like decided against that, and I'm going to do like mini pages like separate. I did that last year or the year before. I started to do that. I just find it looks a lot more interesting when you're flipping through the pages to like have these little mini bits of art. So I'm going to add these like twiggy bits. I just felt as if just the leaves would be a bit boring, and I felt as if I needed to fill the space, but I didn't want to do splashes or anything, so I thought I would add these twiggy bits. No real reason, just thought they would look nice, and they did. You can see I'm just kind of slapping them on. I'm not really worrying how they look right now. I'll define them later on in the process. I add a lot of layers in my pieces anyway, and especially like something like this, I'll start off with the base layer, and then I'll go in and add like a second layer to kind of define it a bit more. Then I'll go in with the shadows, and I'll go in with the highlights to define everything, and then that's how I finish off. And while I was doing this, I did keep on making sure that that mini page and the main page that I had primed on video didn't stick together. Yeah, so that they didn't dry together. I didn't want that to happen. So you can see that I've added a lot of leaves, and I'm just finishing off. Let me see, what am I doing? Oh yes, I'm adding some more leaves because I thought since like the twig idea popped into my head, I would do that before I add all my other leaves. And I like how that looks a lot better. So I'm just going in and adding more sap green. I'm adding like the sap green in darker areas, like so kind of like an initial shadowing, just kind of figuring out where the light will be coming from. The light in my head is coming from the top right hand corner, so I'm adding the sap green in places where it will be darker, like where the rose would be touching the leaves, and like the middle of the leaves, stuff like that. And then I'll add stronger shadows, as you go. I like to go little by little, just so that I don't like ruin what's underneath, especially since I like to build with layers. I do like to see those layers through. And yes, if I make a mistake, I can go over with chalk primer, but I don't like to always do that because then I lose my layers. I have to kind of start all over again in the spot that I went wrong. So I like to go little bit by little bit, because I can always make the shadows stronger. And you do want a nice dark shadow to create nice contrast within your piece. So like dark shadows, bright highlights, and that just makes everything pop, and you'll see later on. And you can see I'm just kind of filling in that space, like all the spaces in the rose with that rose paint again. And then I'm going to just quickly define it with like the fluorescent pink. And I think, do I add some white at this section? I might do. Or maybe just the fluorescent pink. Yeah, no, I do start to add some white. And you can see how like I'm using that just to define and also put in where the highlights will be when I go to add my stronger highlights. This is like a kind of mid-tone highlight. And I like to add highlights in steps as well. It just adds more depth to the piece, and it makes it look more interesting. So you can see now that everything's starting to take shape. And because like it was going through a really hot mess phase. All pieces tend to go through that, mine especially, but you just have to push through that. Just keep on going, and you'll see when there's an improvement. And sometimes I mess up so much that I just put it to the side. If it's a journal page, I might go over, or I'll just turn over the page and go, ah well. If it's a canvas, I don't like to waste canvases, so I will put it aside, and then I will just recreate something on it later on. So adding some highlights on those twigs. Oh, I made the brown by mixing the pink and the green, because red and green makes brown, so pink and green would too, because pink is pretty much red. And that made a really nice brown, and that's also a good way to keep your pieces cohesive. If you want to make a brown or like a really dark color, you don't have to bring in black or brown. You can just mix the colors you have, because most of the time if you're using contrasting colors, that'll make a brown or like a close to black color. And black isn't really a natural color. It's not a color at all, actually. It's a shade, but it can be really stark. So I think I just prefer mixing my own quote-unquote black. So I've like gone in and done that with the leaves as well, and I'll just give you a quick close-up. I added some white. I kind of mix it with the green to add those where those highlights would be. So what is next? Ah yes, I wasn't too happy with the brown of the twigs, so I mixed some more greeny brown. So I added more green than pink. Sorry about that. And And then I'm just adding like the shadows, and that'll add like the definition I wanted on the twigs. And it just looked a lot better. Like that really warm pinky brown I just wasn't really feeling, but this more greeny brown just looked a bit better. And you can see I'm being a lot more careful. I did wet my brush a lot more. I was mostly working like dry brushing, but I did wet my brush a lot more for the twigs. It just made it easier because the fabric texture was very textureful. So when you have a dry brush, it's very hard to get a smooth line on such a textured surface. So it makes it easier if you wet your brush. And I'm really happy with like how those twigs turned out. I thought they looked quite good. Oh, and I thought I would ask you guys, like, if you want the whole process in, because I've changed up the way I do my videos. I do keep it like I've made it a lot slower. I thought my videos were a bit too fast and hard to follow, so I've slowed them down a bit. And if you guys want me to like cut out some bits, you feel free to let me know in the comments like what you think of how I've slowed down the video and everything. I'm open to suggestions because I want you guys to enjoy the videos. So I'm now adding shading. I've watered down the Phthalo blue, and I'm going in where the leaves will be darkest. So if the leaf is on top of another leaf, there I would define like around the leaf that's on top, as well as the middle of the leaf, because like the leaf in my head was kind of be like folding up, so the edges would have highlights but not the middle. That would be the darkest. And this is where it kind of gets scary because you're just kind of putting all this dark color on all your work you've done before, but that's okay. Just keep on working through it. It's cool. Sometimes you have to cover up things to get further, and especially with this, like the layers do kind of shine through as you go on. And and I'm also adding darkest as well where the flower would be touching. That's also where I'm adding darkest bits. And then I go in with like the sap green and the medium yellow. And you can see I'm kind of covering up the dark bits, but I can go in and add more dark areas. And this is when I'm going to add in the veins. So you can see I'm adding in like the veins with the dark area, but then I would define it even more with the lighter paint, like the yellows and the greens. And this is where I'm really putting in those strong highlights. So I start off with the yellow, and then I add white. And you can see I'm putting highlights on both edges of the leaves because I want to show how curved it is, and like the highlights do help that. But on the side that the light would be hitting more, I add stronger highlights. So on that leaf you can see on one side there's more highlights than the other, just to show you where the light's coming from. And what I made a mistake, I kind of did the leaf that was on top first. When you're doing things that are layering on top of each other, do the ones that are on bottom, so that when you do the top one, you don't have to paint around something. So I only made this mistake once. I did fix it as I went like around, and I did the bottom leaves first and then the top leaves. And the bottom leaves will always be a bit darker. So this one has a bit of highlight, but not that much. And this is again my initial highlights. I will go in and add stronger highlights afterwards, because at the moment it's not bright enough. At least it wasn't bright enough for me. You really want some nice strong contrasts. Oh, and I forgot to mention, when you're looking at references, I didn't copy any of the photos. I was just looking at them for inspiration, just to like see how things were done and see how people kind of got these like textures that I was kind of looking for. And you'll see that like if you look at the board, none of them really look like mine, and vice versa. So yeah, so when you're using references, especially when you're going to use something to sell, don't copy something because that is somebody else's work. If you look at, say, like different photos of, I don't know, a face, just to kind of get an idea, and then you then go and make your own face, that's okay. But if you then do the whole person, yes, you can. Like in my studies, when I'm doing my daily sketches, you can, I do copy the photos, but they're not going anywhere. They're not selling or anything. This is just going to stay in my sketchbook. I'll share it on Instagram and stuff, but it's not my work. It's like I've used something else as a study, so that's okay as a study. But if you're selling and stuff, it's don't copy somebody else's work. I thought I would just put that in there. And if you do like create something while watching this video, Please do tag me on Instagram and on Facebook. I also have a Facebook group that you can share your creations in, because I would love to see what you guys are working on. If you do work on something while my video's in the background, or if you draw inspiration from this piece, I don't mind at all if you do create something inspired by any of my videos. That's kind of like the whole point. I'm showing my processes to inspire and to share tips and tricks with you. So please do share with me. All of my social media links are down below, so you can check those out if you like. So you can see I'm adding some stronger highlights now, because I thought at this point I didn't really like how like dull it looked, so I added some stronger ones. Oh, and I am working wet and wet. When I'm working on a leaf, I do the shadows and everything. I add the highlights. I go in quite thickly, just because it just adds more texture, and I like texture on my pieces. And when I go to work on another leaf, I'll wash the brush out and I'll start on the other leaf. So I wash the brush between like leaves, but on like one leaf I am working wet and wet. And you can like let layers dry and then go on, but to be honest, I really like working wet and wet. It also helps because I'm very impatient, so it helps when I can work wet and wet, especially with acrylics. I like to work wet and wet with acrylics. Watercolors not so much, I'll let them dry, but acrylics I like working wet and wet. I like how you can just kind of blend and mix your colors like on the page. I really like that look. And then each leaf will look slightly individual because it's mixing on the page. It's not the same thing. So I like working wet and wet for that. But you can find your own techniques on how you like to create things and run with that. And I don't always work wet and wet with acrylics. It's just like sometimes I do need to let things dry. So because I did like between each kind of layer of the painting, I did let dry. So the initial layer I let dry, and then like when I did the second layer I let it dry. But when it came to this, I didn't really let it dry. I did let the leaves dry a little bit before I went in with the rose, just so I wouldn't get any muddy colors, but that's about it. But most of the time I was working wet and wet, especially when it came to the rose. You'll see what I mean by like mixing on the page. I just really like that look. Right, so I've added some highlights to the twigs, just to make them pop a bit more. I found that they were like disappearing into the background, so I thought I would just add some highlights, because yes, they are in the background, but I don't want them to disappear. And now for the shading of the rose. Again, this is where it kind of gets scary, because it's like, oh gosh, all these dark colors. But you'll see that I do dull it down, because once I add these like shadows in like the areas I want it, I go over like the whole thing again with the rose paint. So you see me again, and now this is when I'm defining the petals, because I'm finished with the leaves. So I'm defining the petals even more because it got covered up when I was doing the leaves. And yes, so I'm defining them. I did add some of those pointy petals just because I think it looks more interesting than these like curved petals, because maybe like the petals are folding and stuff like that. And I'm adding it kind of thickly, but not that thickly, because I knew I was going to define it mostly with like the highlights. I just needed to dull down those shadows because they were really dark. Yeah, so I'm covering the whole thing, and then I can go in with the highlights. And after this, I don't think I added any more of like that shadow color. I thought it was fine afterwards. Let me see. Oh yes, I'm going in with the fluorescent pink, like an initial highlight, just like the same way I was using the yellow on the leaves. And again, just defining more, and then I'll go in and I'll like mix the white. And again, when I'm working with like the wet and wet, it does kind of mix, so you'll see that. Oh, and I do add some medium yellow. I'll add it in a little bit. And the reason is because I thought the rose just looked really boring. It just was pink and bleh. So I thought I would add some of the yellow, and this does help sometimes to make your pieces look better. If you add colors from different areas of the piece in in other areas, like in like little touches. So I add the yellow, like maybe like where the leaves would be touching, or like maybe where like maybe the light might be bouncing off the leaf and onto the flower. Who knows? This is where artistic license comes in, and you could do whatever you want. So yeah, so I added like the yellow in some areas once I kind of got like the shadows and the pinks all sorted out. And I really liked how that looked. So then when I went to add highlights, then the white was mixing with the yellow and the pink, and I thought that just looked really cool, because like when the yellow went over like the pink, it kind of made like some orangey bit, so that's kind of like making a new color that wasn't even there before. And then when with the white, it like lightened some of the orange bits, but then it was mixing with the pink. So like the initial layer of white is quite like dulled down because it was just mixing, because it was so wet and wet. But then I did go in like with a second layer of highlights. It's a nice really bright highlights, and I made like the paint nice and thick. And I added a little bit of pink just to kind of not, so that the white wasn't too stark, but not too much to make it like a light pink. And I really liked how that looked. So, and you'll be able to see like how the definition just improves and improves, and how it just pops. And I just love how it turns out. And I did also add some fluorescent pink to the leaves, because then the leaves look boring. So I added some fluorescent pink, really watered down onto the leaves, like where the petal would be like touching. And then that was it. And yeah, so I really enjoyed this process. I forgot how much I like enjoyed painting like this. I definitely have to do another spread like doing this kind of painting technique. And I love how this turned out like nice and bright, and it popped. And yeah, so I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please do give me a thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't already, and if you're new, welcome to my channel. Don't forget to click that bell so you get notified whenever I upload new videos. My new schedule is every Friday. And yes, so I hope you enjoyed the video, and I can't wait to see you guys next week. Bye!